What's up, everybody? Welcome to Puzzle Huddle. This is Matthew Goins. I'm here with a special guest. I'm really excited about talking to some of the people that we feature on our social media pages. So this is one of the first opportunities where I have a chance to do that. I want to learn about education. I want to learn about trajectory. I want to learn about success and some of the insight that they have as professionals. So thanks for joining us. Please take a moment and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We want to make sure that you're able to see all the videos that we post. And we're very excited about sharing this interview series with you. Today I have a good friend, Dr. Anthony Washington. Sir, if you could please introduce yourself and let us know who you are and what degrees and what levels of school and what you studied in your school path.
Okay, as Matthew said, my name is Anthony Washington. I attended Norfolk State University for my undergraduate degree, where I got a Bachelor of Music Education. I attended Norfolk State for my master's as well, where I studied music performance and composition. And I got my Ph.D. from College of William and Mary in educational leadership with an emphasis in gifted education.
All right, in order to get a PhD, a lot of times it's a requirement that you write a dissertation. Can you tell me or tell us about your dissertation and what you studied through that process?
So for my dissertation, you might have guessed by my first two degrees, I'm a musician. And my dissertation was about developing creative ability at the highest levels. So looking at people who are experts within a field and determining who becomes the Steve Jobs or Wynton Marsalis or big names out of that pool of experts was really what the study was about.
All right, so you weren't necessarily limited to expert musicians, but you were able to unpackage that and look at experts in different fields, including things outside of music?
Well, the goal was to study musicians to understand how they develop creativity, specifically jazz musicians, because they study creativity as a part of their training, and then determine the extent to which we can generalize that out into other fields. So that to say that you should be developing creativity in science, we may call it innovation over there, but it's still creative processes when you look at it, like what the brain is doing.
All right, go. What leads you to want to study that? What about your life takes you on a path of inquiry or learning or interest that points you to that specific thing as something you want to study?
I began to pursue my doctoral studies because at the time I was a band teacher, and I recognized this kind of adage that, the smartest kids are always musicians, or music makes students smarter. And I really had kind of a chicken or the egg type of fascination with it because I recognized I always had the valedictorian in my class. They were always in the band, but did studying music help them get to that place? Or was it something about them that already was high achieving that led them to choose music as a place where they studied? So that's really what started me down that path, and really recognizing that a lot more of it is able to be developed than it is you're one way or the other, right? You can start from pretty much any place, but there are steps and actions you can take to develop whatever that skill or that trajectory is.
At what age do you start to see children really really dig into their interest in music? Do we see that kids emerge in terms of their passion in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, or is it something that you can even introduce to a high school student and still get some of these same outcomes?
It really varies based on the student. So if I talk about the study specifically, because that I was looking at in that moment at experts, there were some who started in elementary school that had been playing instruments their whole lives and always took it very seriously. There were others who might have been in a band class but didn't really care too much and then took it seriously in college, or even for some in a master's program. Yeah. There were a couple of musicians who were math teachers, right, as undergrad, and then decided to pursue music seriously and are now performing around the world.
Yeah, I've heard popular in the literature the relationship between success in STEM and STEAM, and the artistic mindset and the framing that helps a person deal with the science but apply some creativity where they're able to create solutions, but the creative part of their brain has an engagement with the science part of the brain that generates wider solutions. Did you find that happens across communities and cultures, or is it specific, or are all children candidates for it, no matter what their background might be?
There are definitely some communities and cultures that lend themselves toward it. In jazz improvisation specifically, you'll definitely find a lot of musicians who started in church, right? A lot of guys played coming up in church and learned how to improvise by, just sitting in the pulpit and being able to improvise and play off of someone who's singing, or, if they're playing piano, being able to begin playing when the preacher gets to a certain part and, they do certain things. So a lot of them started there. And from there, it's a little bit easier to develop into a musician, but you definitely have to make a decision. There's always a point in each of my participants' lives where they said, you know what, I'm going to take this seriously, and their behavior changed as a result. So regardless of how you start out, being able to make that decision and identify your purpose as being an expert or a great musician was kind of the defining choice that, regardless of where they came from, everyone had that moment.
If we think about you specifically, do you think music helped you become or helped you be a better student in your other classes?
Absolutely. When you take music seriously, there's a certain, there are a couple of things. One, I found that when you're a musician and you're going out for competitions, the feedback you get is not hand-holding, right? They're pretty much cut and dry. This is what you did, this is what I expected. So you get really accustomed to receiving feedback that is not flowery at all. It's like, listen, this is what it is. But then also you get accustomed to spending large amounts of time by yourself working on your craft. Because if you don't practice, and that means going in the practice room for sometimes hours a day, just working on that craft, then you'll never get there. But once you go through that process and doing it with music, you can apply it to other things, because now you know the determination it takes, and you've already developed that skill set of being able to work and practice independently on a long-term task or project.
You know what? One thing I'm tripping about a little bit is my experience with you is in music, but in marching band. So when we thinking music, I'm thinking dancing, goofing off, going on trips, like a lot of socializing, like more. I'm focused more on the good time of it, not necessarily the practice, like the competency part. So can you? Okay, so you got marching band, which is going to be a lot of fun. But behind that, right, there's some skill development that maybe I'm not as cognitively, I'm not as aware of, that focus and intention that produces the party time experience that you see with the marching band. Wow. Okay. So you guys are in the room practicing doing things, right?
And marching band can be fun, right? There are some kids who will just be in the band and they're not really serious about being a musician, but they play well enough. You know what I mean? It doesn't require hours a day to just be a musician in the band. But once you make that decision to say, okay, I want to be able to compete at a higher level. I want to go to a conservatory for college, or I want to, study and play with a professional symphony orchestra. You then begin to practice differently aside from that marching band piece. And that's where you're working on technique and articulation and, musicality and all of those different things.
Yeah, how does that kick in? So some kids, you might have the opportunity to have musicians in your family, or you might be surrounded by musicians. But when does that awareness that I could do this at a higher level, when does that begin to kick in for a student?
It really depends on their experiences. So one of the musicians I studied played football up until probably his junior year of high school, when the coach really sat him down and said, you're probably going to be too small to do this at a Division I level. He was good, can run and all of those things, but there's just a certain physicality you have to have if you're going to be really great at football. And he also had a lot of talent at music. So for him, it was junior year where he said, all right, well, since I can't do that, let me pay a little more attention to this. And had a background in gospel music and grew up in the church and really said, all right, well, I'm going to dig in and do that. For other musicians, there was literally a guy who said, I studied, I played, pretty much, I was in marching band growing up, but then it wasn't until after undergrad that he said, you know what, I think I could take this music seriously, and went into a master's program at Juilliard and is now a professional musician. So it hits different people at different times.
Yeah, for so many people, and I talk to a lot of professionals about how they became whatever it is that they pursued in life, and whether it's exposure through their family or through a mentor or through an environment, but it's doctors don't just invent themselves out of the desert, right? They need to be exposed to some doctors.
Exactly.
Same with musicians and athletes. A lot of times you'll find professional athletes that have other athletes in their family, or they're in the lineage of athletes.
Very much so.
Doctors, musicians, it all, even military personnel. Very often you'll find military and clergy. A lot of pastors are the sons and daughters of pastors. So there's some exposure that helps kind of create a mechanism that activates a specific interest. You're also a parent. What about your research? How does that inform how you parent? Do you do anything you think intentionally, specifically because of what you learned through your research?
I mean, you hit the nail on the head, and especially for young kids, my son is 2 right now, it's exposure, right? You'll never know what your child is going to take that interest in, right? Like, you look at Bill Gates and the way he grew up, his parents didn't work in computers, but they worked at a university that had a mainframe that allowed him to spend a ton of time messing around with computers. If they didn't expose him to that, he probably would have done great things, but in a very different field. So it's really, for my son, I mean, we're doing all the sports, so we're getting soccer, baseball, basketball, football, but then he's also playing drums and keyboard, and I mean, when I say playing, he's just literally throwing the ball around, banging on the keyboard, but finding the things that he gravitates toward and finding what he likes to continue to do, and then feeding those passion areas, right? And that might change 4 or 5 times, but as it changes, feed it appropriately. You know, don't mortgage the house to buy him a new trumpet, but initially, but you know, I mean, he's getting exposure to everything, so he can choose then what he wants to do.
Yeah, kids' interest can change, like their interest in TV shows and tablets and games and activities. Right. My son went from Batman to Spider-Man, and now it's like he said, he's completely changed teams. It's like it's no longer. So I think I want to ask one more question. Can you tell me about any specific person that you talked to in your research that really just had a compelling story?
So, you know, at our high school, we had a lot of musicians who went on to do really well throughout their career. And one of them being Ali Jackson, who was a drummer who graduated from Cass. And he was actually playing for Jazz at Lincoln Center. So that's Wynton Marsalis's Jazz Orchestrata in New York. So I was able to reach out to Ali, and he was one of my first participants in my study. And after talking to him, he was like, yo, if you come backstage, you'll probably be able to meet a lot more of the guys from Lincoln Center. You know, I can introduce you around. So I was able to go and to interview probably 7 or 8 of the musicians, including Wynton himself, to talk about their actual upbringing and experience. And for Wynton, it was a little different because, I mean, I know his background. Like, his biography has been published. He's been well written about throughout the years. But to meet a lot of the other musicians who are at that level of expertise, they're among the best to do what they do. And, you know, how did they get there? What were their experiences like? Where did they come from? And each one of those stories was uniquely different, but all made sense. But my goal was to really find out the commonality of those stories. So one part of that was exposure, right? It was really being in a place where, whether it was a parent, whether it was church, whether it was an older sibling, they were exposed to jazz music in some way. And then at some point, the next major milestone was that at some point they made a decision to study that at a high level. They said, I'm going to identify myself as a jazz musician, and I'm going to pursue that as a career. And then their behavior changes as a result of that.
Yeah, they need to get more serious and more focused, and the behavior needs to support the dream or the goal.
Yeah.
What were some of the influences that you talk about exposure? In what ways were you exposed to music growing up?
Well, I learned early on, my father was a jazz musician, right? So even though he was in New York and we were in Detroit, I still knew that about him and kind of heard, you know, what he was playing. And he had a jazz band in Buffalo, so he was really influential in the music scene out there. And then, I mean, it was at a time when public schools just had music, right? You could just take music, you could take band class, and they had an instrument you could borrow if you needed one. So things like that were just easy and available. And then getting to high school, and my mind really got opened up to see all of the possibilities. It was like, all right, cool. Like, I can do this. I enjoy this. So I really pursued it.
All right, and then what kicked in on the way that made you realize that you could do this for a living? Like, what was there a performance or a thing that happened or somebody that said something to you? Like, what showed up that said, this may be a thing that I want to take seriously and do with specific intention and carry it through my university experience or however far you went as a musician?
It was really seeing people who were doing it, right? So I was then exposed on it. So one level is being exposed to the music itself and taking an interest to it. But then being exposed to the field of musicians and meeting people like Ali, and knowing Roland, and like all these people who are really getting out into the scene, and you see them begin to live life as a musician, and you're like, this isn't bad. I enjoy playing my instrument. I can get paid to do what I love. You know, that's what everybody tells you should do. So at that point, I really started to pursue it because I also have a little of that competitive nature. So, you know, it was sports before music and, you know, all of those different types of things, but just really saying, you know, I could really enjoy doing that and I get a great pleasure from it and I'm decent at it, right? So if I work hard, I can be good, and just really seeing a pathway. Because I had a lot of other things I wanted to do, but music was where I had a pathway and could make those things happen.
So when you're growing and developing and learning, a lot of times you're going to be incentivized as you're having success, right? It's hard to continue to do something that's frustrating for you and that you're not good at. What's an early musical success that you had, or a good experience that kind of gave you enough support and, you know, success that really encouraged you to pursue that? What's one of those fun things?
It was actually a combination between two people who I would consider to be two of my greatest teachers that I ever encountered in my life. One being Benjamin Pruitt, who was the head band director at Cass, and the other being William Lucas, who was a trumpet player in the Detroit Symphony. So Mr. Pruitt plugged me in with an orchestra training initiative. It was a grant program that got you to take lessons for $5 from Detroit Symphony Orchestra musicians. So these are people who are great in all that, not only
and for five.
If it was $6, I might not have been able to make it. But if it was $5, I was able to get there. And you know, that was just another one of those experiences that opened my eyes. I was able to participate in the Detroit Symphony Civic Orchestra and all of these other things. But once that grant program ran out, Mr. Lucas said, well, listen, the grant program is ending, and he knew his lessons were far beyond what I could afford. So he said, listen, if you will teach someone what I teach you, I'll teach you for free. And that was really transformative in being a musician as well as a music teacher, because now I'm taking these lessons from a symphony orchestra musician that are phenomenal. And my only requirement is I have to teach somebody else this. So you could imagine the guys in my high school.
Were you doing this in high school?
This is when I was section leader. This is what I was teaching them when we were in sections.
Off in the hallway, and you go into some like world-class lessons with someone in a professional orchestra.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And I guess his normal rate is probably not $5.
No, not at all. Not at all.
All right. Well, fast forward me to so you're having success, but part of music is performing. What are some of your favorite performances that you've had a chance to participate?
My most notable performance was playing with the Temptations. So I actually got, when Otis was still living, he was the last living member, and there was a Motown review of some sort happening at the Renaissance Center in Detroit. And a good buddy of ours, Chad, called me up, and he was playing trombone, I was playing trumpet, and I mean, the interesting part was that we never rehearsed, right? So we walked in, they handed us music. There was a director, Smurf, talked us through the music.
Wait, Smurf?
Al McKenzie, yes,
Okay,
sir. He's a piano player, but I mean, that's how they know him. You know?
All right.
And he talked us through the music, right? Said, "Lil, we're cutting these measures, we're doing this." He knew it all by heart, by the way. And I mean, this is a book of music. And then we went on stage and performed, right? There was no rehearsal. I didn't even know the names of the other musicians. Like, it was one of those true professional settings where you set up, you got to be able to read music, you go on stage, you perform, and that was it. And I mean, it was an eye-opening experience to be able to participate in something like that, and to, even though from a distance, see a living Temptation. Like, it was an awesome moment.
Yeah, it's so much about development and experience seems to be related to having a cohort with a similar interest and passion, and being, in a peer group of people that have the same goal of achievement and in the same direction, because you guys kind of all feed off of each other, and there's insights that you get from that collection of people that are all kind of working their way through the same career path.
100%, absolutely. That network of a musician, and once you identify as a musician, in my study, I called it professional practice. So whether you're in high school or wherever, once you make that decision that I'm going to be this, you begin to work and act as a professional, which means engaging with the community of musicians and people who are also studying and trying to get to the places you want to be. And it kind of happens naturally, because if you're both entering these competitive spaces, you begin to recognize people's faces and make friends and know them, and you start to expect them when you get to those places, because you guys are on the same path.
Along the way, I'm glad that you had success as a musician and you were able to connect with a community that were to help you able to achieve that pursuit professionally. But there would almost need to be a counter opinion as you were growing up that may have encouraged you out of music, because the success rate for be a professional musician versus, I don't know, be something that where there's a higher placement rate.
Yeah.
Did you also have that kind of opinion showing up saying, we know you like music, but you might want to also plan to be an accountant and play your music on the weekends.
Well, the musician's version of that was get an education degree, right? Like if you can play, you'll go play, but you'll always be able to teach music if you understand it at a deep level and you have that licensure. So that's actually when I made the not transition, but that's when I added the formal education piece. So I've been pursuing music, but it was really that thought of, all right, well, if music doesn't work out, I'm gonna need to pay the bills. Let me make sure that I have a license that would allow me to go teach.
All right, and then what you study for your PhD, how are you able to use that professionally now? How do you take the learning from that and apply that as a consultant or in the classroom or in support of teachers and programs in schools?
Well, there are a number of ways that I make that work. One being really taking a methodology. So for a lot of band directors, they don't have a way to teach music. They just teach based on a method book, right? They don't really understand a philosophy of, here are the properties and dimensions of what it means to be a good musician. Here's how you develop them in isolation. Because that's what I learned those experts did. They take time and they focus on one specific aspect of playing the music, ignoring everything else, and move through it, and then at some point put it all together, and they find a better outcome when they approach it that way. So that's helpful. Also then understanding creativity at a very deep level. When I'm talking with STEM and STEAM teachers and people in general classrooms, really talking about how you can incorporate creative development into your class, because I mean, if a child is in your science class is going to grow up to become the doctor that cures cancer, there's going to have to be some creativity applied to that problem. Like, we know that problem exists, and if the textbook could solve it, it would already be done. So how do you develop that inquiring and problem solving in the children so that they can think critically and apply that knowledge to various problems that they'll find in the world?
Yeah, it's such both. You got to teach for so many different perspectives. Like some of teaching is memorization, and then like my kids are reading, so it's this phonics thing. But then there's also the creativity that's just as important. So you need to. It's important to prioritize all the things, but trying to mix them all up and give each kind of teaching modality some airtime with your kid. You got to do it on purpose. It's hard to trip over it and cover all the bases on accident.
Yeah, and what you can do, right, and what I often tell teachers that they don't think of as you talk about like the phonics and the fundamental components, start with the creative aspect, right? It's kind of, if you heard of problem-based learning or people talk about PBL all the time, present the challenge first and allow the learning to support the accomplishment of the task. So if I need you to be able to play this symphony, let's start with why we need to play this and what this moment means and what all is required. And then I give you a why that makes you want to do the work that allows you to get there. So we can fill in those fundamental components. There's stuff you're going to need to remember. But if you don't care about the outcome, you're not going to remember it. But if I can make you care about that outcome or solving that problem or that creative solution up front, then the other stuff kind of will take care of itself if you're willing to put in the work.
What kind of music? As an expert in music and education and improv and jazz and the nuance of creativity and its application to science and learning and academic, what music do you play at home for your kids?
Literally everything. Right now, my son is stuck on Silk Sonic. Leave the door open. If I turn that on, he will run, grab the drum set, and drag it to wherever the song is playing.
Is that some Afro beats or what is
that? No.
Is that trap
Anderson
music?
.Paak and Bruno Mars.
Okay.
It's actually like they're redoing like that 70s feel of R&B stuff like that.
I'm caught up now.
Yeah. So he really loves everything that's in that sound.
Oh, because it's jamming.
Yeah. And I mean, and when he watches the video, Anderson .Paak is playing the drum and singing.
Yeah.
And that's it. Like, there has to be a microphone in the drum set, and he's gonna rock out. So
okay, so that gets the party started at your house.
But he sleeps to classical and jazz music, so I have CDs that I play when he's sleeping, because I'm not sure if that Mozart effect stuff is real, but I'm gonna definitely bake it in just in case.
And just to push the envelope, so you would be an expert in music, but what other ways are you pushing creativity in your home with your kids specifically?
Well, one is that exposure piece, so we're finding everything that we can get him into, but then two, really just trying to find different challenges that I let him struggle with. So I let him fail with things all the time. Just yesterday, there was a little playhouse that he has that has a circle that you're supposed to put a ball in.
Yeah.
And he gets like a bracket from a Lego that's not supposed to go in there and drops it in. And then he looks at me when it doesn't go down. And I'm like, hey, kid, I don't know what you're going to do. That's probably not it. And it took him a minute before he realized he could rock it, and it went the rest of the way down. And then that became the new game. So now he's dropping the Lego in, but realizing if he rocks the house, it can come out. Just challenges that you allow him to solve for without me giving him every answer along the way.
Yeah, it's so much better. Even with the puzzles that our company sells, I always encourage as much as possible for the parent or the guardian to do it with the child, because the experience is just better. To hand an educational device or toy or anything to a kid and let them play with it. But when an adult is paying attention, you can look for learning opportunities, engagement, and solutions that maybe just wouldn't have been achieved if the adults were ignoring the play experience. Just your mindset and paying attention to it.
Yeah. I would also think, though, and I would encourage parents to not be too involved initially, right? Don't let them completely fail, but give them a moment where you're not helping them, because you'll learn a lot about how your child approaches problems.
Yeah.
And they'll also learn a lot about themselves when they're staring at something that they don't know how to do. And then obviously, yeah, at some point, dad is going to sit down and say, okay, hey, how about you try this? You know what I mean? Or maybe you forgot this. But give them that chance to struggle, because they got to get uncomfortable in the learning process, right? If everything is easy for you, you see a lot of kids who will burn out as they get to college and, oh no, all of a sudden stuff got difficult and I've always known the answer all my life. Let them understand how to struggle as they learn, right?
Yeah, I'm learning that with reading with my kid, and how fast do I rescue them? Because if they approach a word, if they don't know it quickly, at the moment of frustration, do I save them, or do I let them struggle with the word? So yeah, that personal struggle, it seems to be an interesting part of learning. All right, we mentioned earlier in the interview that you're a parent. Can you tell me about your kids and some of the successes that you're having, and some of the milestones that you're observing your kids as they're growing and maturing in your household?
Well, yeah, just seeing my son be able to learn things that I don't necessarily teach him. So like we were talking about those Silk Sonic videos, and he watches it a lot. And at first it was just a lot of noise, right? The video comes on and he's just blamming on the drums the entire thing. And after a point, I got to be able to see him, and while he's not playing it exactly, I could see him speed up and slow down at the times when the drum set player is doing it on the video, or he knows where the breaks are. Now, he can't play the break, right? But he knows that right here, a lot of stuff happens, and then it slows down, right? So he's not doing it exactly, but he's learning it. And I haven't given him any formal music instruction, so I'm just watching and seeing what he gravitates to at this point. But it just, it's really exciting to be able to see what the potential is. If he does develop a love for it, right now it's a toy like everything else, but then being able to, share that with my son would be a really great day.
And that's like that's the components of music education, without necessarily handing him an instrument and learning scales. It's a piece of musical theory and education that would feed his musical capabilities in the future. If he understands rhythm and breaks and escalations and de-escalations, like all of that informs. Right. So
absolutely, it's like they say the best way to learn music, like music is a language. So the same way that you learn to speak by watching your parents, he's learning music by watching musicians. Right, that's always the best way to do it. It's what Suzuki talent method is based off of. Learning the way that you learn your mother tongue, as Suzuki calls it. So really being able to experience it and just mimic it. And then later on, you learn how to read and write and all of those things, but you learn how to speak way before that. So he's still learning how to speak music, and I'm really excited about it.
I'm gonna have to bring you back for a breakdown on the Suzuki. On the whole, unpack the Suzuki for me. But thanks for sharing a little bit about your kids.
Not a problem.
Thanks everybody for hanging out, for paying attention, for watching our new video interview series. If you could, just take a moment to hit the like button and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're gonna bring you a lot of cool interviews in the future, and we wanna have your engagement. Thanks for hanging out, and we appreciate your time.